Arthur Whitaker sat at the head of the grand mahogany table in his sprawling estate, his piercing blue eyes scanning the room. The tension in the air was as thick as the aroma of roast lamb, lingering from the lavish family dinner. His 3 children, Eleanor, Victor, and Benjamin, shifted uncomfortably in their seats, sensing their father was about to deliver one of his infamous proclamations. Arthur leaned forward, tapping his wine glass lightly with a fork. "Now that we've all had our fill," he began, his deep voice commanding silence, "there's something important I need to share." Eleanor, the eldest, immediately straightened, her brow furrowed. She had always been her father's confidant, the one who managed his appointments, smoothed over business disputes, and upheld the Whitaker legacy. But even she had no idea what was coming. Victor, the middle child, slouched in his chair, trying to appear indifferent, though the beads of sweat on his temple betrayed him. His failing tech startup had drained his bank account and left him drowning in debt. Whatever Arthur was about to say, he hoped it would include some relief for his financial woes. Benjamin, the youngest, sat with his arms crossed, his expression a careful mask of disinterest. He was the black sheep of the family, having spent years dodging responsibility and chasing fleeting pleasures. He didn't care much for his father's lectures, unless, of course, they involved his inheritance. Arthur cleared his throat. "I've been thinking a great deal about the future of this family and the legacy I leave behind. It's become clear to me that some changes are necessary." The siblings exchanged wary glances. Changes? That was rarely a good sign when it came to Arthur Whitaker. "I've decided to revise my will," Arthur continued, his tone sharp. "This family has lived in luxury for generations, but I fear that wealth has bred complacency, entitlement, waste." Victor's knuckles turned white as he gripped the edge of the table. Benjamin narrowed his eyes, while Eleanor's lips parted in silent protest. "What are you saying, father?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. "I'm saying," Arthur replied, his gaze like steel, "that the majority of my estate will go to charitable causes. I've consulted with attorneys, and the new will reflects my intention to ensure this fortune does some good in the world, rather than simply enabling idleness and greed." The silence that followed was deafening. Victor was the first to speak, his voice strained. "You're giving our money away? To strangers? While your own son can barely keep his head above water?" Arthur turned to him, his expression unyielding. "Your financial troubles are a result of your own poor decisions, Victor. I've bailed you out once. I won't do it again." Benjamin leaned forward, his voice low and dangerous. "And what about me, father? Do you think I don't deserve my share of what's rightfully mine?" Arthur's gaze didn't waver. "You've never shown an interest in earning your place in this family, Benjamin. You've squandered every opportunity I've given you. This isn't about what you deserve, it's about what's right." Eleanor opened her mouth to speak, but no words came. She had always thought herself above the petty squabbles of her brothers, but even she felt the sting of betrayal. For years, she had devoted herself to Arthur's every whim, sacrificing her own ambitions to uphold his vision for the family. And now this? Arthur leaned back in his chair, surveying his children. "I'll finalize the paperwork next week. I suggest you each take a hard look at your lives and think about what truly matters. This conversation is over." He rose, leaving the room as his children sat in stunned silence. That night, Victor poured himself a drink in the study, his mind racing. Benjamin joined him, his face dark with anger. "This isn't happening," Benjamin muttered. "He can't just take everything from us." Victor's lips curled into a bitter smile. "You know how stubborn he is. He'd rather give it all away than admit he failed as a father." Benjamin's eyes narrowed. "Then maybe we need to take matters into our own hands." Victor froze, staring at his brother. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying," Benjamin whispered, his voice chilling, "that old men like Arthur don't live forever. And sometimes they need a little help." Victor's hand trembled, but he didn't set down his glass. For the first time, the unthinkable didn't seem so impossible. Victor downed the rest of his drink, the liquid burning his throat as Benjamin's words lingered in the air. "That's insane," he muttered, but his voice lacked conviction. "Do you even hear yourself?" Benjamin leaned back against the wall, his expression calm, almost casual. Do you have a better idea? Because sitting around while he strips us of everything doesn't sound like a winning plan. Victor hesitated, running a hand through his hair. His mounting debts were a noose tightening around his neck, and his father's announcement had kicked the chair out from under him. He had tried everything, loans, investors, even gambling, but nothing had worked. And now, with Arthur's revised will on the horizon, his last lifeline was slipping away. We'd never get away with it, Victor said, though his voice wavered. People would ask questions. Benjamin scoffed, pushing off the wall. You're overthinking it, as usual. Father's old. He has a bad heart. One extra pill in his whiskey, or a little nudge on the stairs, and everyone will chalk it up to a tragic accident. We grieve, inherit the estate, and move on. Victor stared at his brother, a knot tightening in his stomach. He wanted to reject the plan outright, to walk away from this dark and dangerous suggestion. But as the seconds ticked by, the desperation that had been gnawing at him for months started to drown out his better judgment. Just think about it, Benjamin said with a smirk, slapping Victor on the shoulder before heading for the door. You know where to find me when you're ready to stop being a coward. The following day, Eleanor visited the estate, determined to confront Arthur. She found him in his study, the fire crackling softly in the hearth as he reviewed a stack of documents. Father, we need to talk, she said, her voice firm. Arthur looked up, his brow furrowing. If this is about the will, Eleanor, my decision is final. It's not just about the will, she said, stepping closer. It's about the way you've blindsided us. We've spent our lives trying to live up to your expectations, and now you're punishing us for it. Arthur sighed, setting down his pen. You've misunderstood me. This isn't punishment, it's a course correction. This family has grown too focused on material wealth. It's time to leave a legacy that actually matters. But what about the family? Eleanor pressed. What about us? Do we mean so little to you? Arthur's expression softened, and for a moment, Eleanor thought she saw a flicker of regret in his eyes. Eleanor, you've always been the strongest of the three. I know this decision feels unfair, but in time, you'll understand why I had to make it. Eleanor clenched her fists, her frustration simmering beneath the surface. She wanted to scream, to demand that he reconsider, but she knew it would be futile. Instead, she turned on her heel and left the study, her mind racing. That night, Victor found himself standing outside Benjamin's apartment, the cold wind biting at his face. He hesitated for a moment, then knocked. Benjamin answered almost immediately, a knowing grin spreading across his face. I knew you'd come around, Benjamin said, stepping aside to let him in. This is crazy, Victor said, his voice shaky, but I don't see another way. Benjamin poured 2 glasses of whiskey and handed one to Victor. Exactly. We don't have a choice. So, let's get to work. Over the next few days, the brothers meticulously planned their next move. They studied Arthur's routine, noting when he took his medications, when he went for his evening walks, and when he retired to bed. Every detail was scrutinized, every risk calculated. But as the plan took shape, Victor's guilt began to creep in. He found himself lying awake at night, haunted by the enormity of what they were about to do. Benjamin, on the other hand, seemed energized by the prospect, his excitement growing with each passing day. The final piece fell into place on a rainy Wednesday evening. Arthur was set to host a small dinner party for a few business associates, providing the perfect cover for an accidental fall. Benjamin would distract the guests while Victor tampered with the staircase railing, ensuring that one misstep would send their father plummeting to his demise. The night of the dinner arrived, and the atmosphere in the Whitaker estate was electric with tension. Eleanor, unaware of her brother's plan, mingled with the guests, her smile masking her lingering resentment. Victor and Benjamin exchanged a brief glance, a silent acknowledgement of what was about to happen. As the evening wore on, Victor slipped away from the dining room, his hands trembling as he approached the grand staircase. He pulled a small wrench from his pocket and began loosening the bolts on the railing, his heart pounding in his chest. Victor? He froze, his breath catching in his throat. Slowly, he He turned to see Eleanor standing at the top of the stairs, her expression a mix of confusion and suspicion. "What are you doing?" she asked, her voice low. Victor's mind raced, searching for an explanation, but none came. Eleanor's eyes darted to the railing, then back to her brother, realization dawning on her face. "Oh my God," she whispered. "You're trying to—" Before she could finish, Benjamin appeared behind her, his smile chilling. "Looks like we've got a problem, Victor." Eleanor's pulse quickened as Benjamin stepped closer, his eyes cold and calculating. "The question is," he said, his voice dripping with menace, "what are we going to do about it?" Eleanor stood frozen at the top of the stairs, her breath caught in her throat. The dim light from the chandelier cast flickering shadows on the walls, but all she could see was Benjamin's predatory smile as he approached. "Benjamin, stop," she said, her voice trembling but firm. "This isn't who we are. We're family." Benjamin's smile twisted into something darker, a mockery of warmth. "Family," he said, laughing softly. "You think Father treated us like family when he decided to give it all away? Don't be naive, Eleanor." Victor, still at the base of the stairs with the wrench in his shaking hands, finally spoke up. "Eleanor, I didn't want this," he stammered. "Ben, he talked me into it. I just didn't see another way out." Eleanor's sharp glare cut through him. "And this was your solution? Murder?" She turned her attention to Benjamin. "You're both sick. If Father knew what you were planning—" "Oh, but he won't," Benjamin interrupted, stepping even closer. "Not unless you decide to tell him. And I'm guessing you won't, because we all know how loyal you are to this family's reputation. Isn't that what you've been clinging to all these years?" Eleanor felt a knot of fear in her stomach, but she refused to let it show. "You think you can intimidate me into silence?" she asked, squaring her shoulders. "No," Benjamin said, tilting his head, "but I think you're smart enough to realize that if this gets out, it won't just ruin Victor and me. It'll destroy all of us. The Whitaker name? Gone. The legacy? Burned to ashes. Do you want that?" Victor looked up at Eleanor, his eyes pleading. "Please, Eleanor. You don't have to like it, but you can't stop it. Not now." Eleanor's heart raced as she weighed her options. She could see the desperation in Victor's face, the cold calculation in Benjamin's, and she realized that neither of them had truly thought this through. They were acting out of greed and fear, not reason. "I'm not going to let you do this," she said firmly, her voice cutting through the tension. Benjamin's expression darkened. "Then you leave us no choice." In a flash, Benjamin lunged toward her, but Eleanor was faster. She darted back, her heels slipping on the polished floor. Grabbing the railing for balance, she shouted, "Father! Help!" The sound of chairs scraping against the dining room floor echoed through the hall as Arthur and his guests rushed toward the commotion. Benjamin froze mid-step, his face twisting in frustration. "What's going on here?" Arthur demanded, his commanding voice filling the space. Eleanor pointed an accusatory finger at Benjamin. "They're trying to hurt you, Father. They were tampering with the stairs." Arthur's sharp eyes flicked to the wrench in Victor's trembling hand. "Victor, is this true?" Victor's face crumpled, tears spilling down his cheeks. "I'm sorry, Father. I didn't want to—" Ben said we had no choice. Arthur's face hardened as he turned to Benjamin. "And you? What do you have to say for yourself?" Benjamin's composure shattered. "You brought this on yourself, old man," he snarled. "You're the one who pitted us against each other. You always played favorites, always judged us, and now you want to take everything we've built and give it away? What did you expect?" Arthur's voice was low and icy. "I expected my sons to be better men than this." The room fell silent as Arthur's business associates watched in stunned disbelief. Finally, Arthur turned to Eleanor. "Thank you for telling me the truth." Eleanor nodded, her throat tight with emotion. "Victor Benjamin," Arthur said, his voice heavy with disappointment, "you've not only betrayed me, you've betrayed this family. You'll leave this house tonight. I'll make sure you have nothing to do with my estate." Victor sobbed quietly, but Benjamin sneered. "You think this is over? You think you've won?" Arthur stared him down. "No, Benjamin. You've already lost. That night, Eleanor sat alone in the study, staring into the dying embers of the fireplace. Her hands still shook from the evening's events, but she felt a small measure of relief. She had stopped them, for now. But as the clock ticked toward midnight, a troubling thought took root in her mind. Benjamin wasn't the type to give up easily. And if he couldn't take their father's fortune legally, who knew how far he would go next? The following week, the Whitaker estate was unnervingly quiet. Arthur, true to his word, had thrown Victor and Benjamin out, cutting them off from the family. Though Eleanor felt some relief, she couldn't shake the sense of dread that clung to her like a shadow. Her brothers were desperate men, and desperate men were dangerous. Late one night, as rain lashed against the windows, Eleanor sat in the study, poring over estate documents Arthur had asked her to review. She was distracted by the eerie stillness of the house, her thoughts looping back to Benjamin's venomous parting words, "You think you've won?" Suddenly, the lights flickered. Then, darkness. Her heart skipped a beat. She reached for her phone, but the screen showed no signal. "A storm," she muttered to herself, trying to tamp down the rising panic. But then she heard it, a faint creak of the floorboards upstairs. Her blood ran cold. Arthur had already gone to bed, and the household staff had left for the evening. She was supposed to be alone. Grabbing the fireplace poker, Eleanor crept toward the stairs. Her pulse thundered in her ears as she ascended, the sound of muffled footsteps growing louder. She reached her father's bedroom door and froze. It was slightly ajar, a sliver of pale light spilling into the hallway. She peeked inside and stifled a gasp. Benjamin was standing over Arthur's bed, a syringe in his hand. Victor stood by the door, nervously shifting his weight. "Ben, hurry up," Victor hissed. "What if someone hears us?" "Relax," Benjamin whispered back, his voice steady. "One injection, and the old man's heart will stop. No one will ever know it wasn't natural." Eleanor's grip tightened on the poker. She knew she had only seconds to act. She pushed the door open with a bang, stepping inside. "Drop it, Benjamin," she shouted, her voice ringing with authority. Both brothers spun around, their faces etched with shock. "Eleanor?" Victor stammered, stepping back. What are you doing?" "Stopping you," she said, raising the poker. Her eyes burned with fury. "You're not going to get away with this." Benjamin sneered, lowering the syringe slightly. "You don't have the guts to stop me, Eleanor. You never did." "Try me," she shot back, her voice unwavering. Arthur stirred in bed, his groggy voice breaking the tension. "What's going on here?" Before Benjamin could act, Eleanor lunged, swinging the poker at his hand. The syringe flew across the room, clattering to the floor. Benjamin snarled and rushed at her, but she sidestepped, shoving him against the wall. "Victor, grab her." Benjamin barked, but Victor hesitated, looking between his siblings with wide, panicked eyes. I didn't sign up for this," Victor stammered, backing away. "Coward." Benjamin spat, struggling to regain his balance. The commotion had woken Arthur fully, and he now sat up, his eyes wide with shock. "What in God's name?" "Stay back, father," Eleanor yelled. "I've got this." She grabbed the syringe off the floor just as Benjamin lunged at her again. This time, Eleanor swung the poker with all her strength, striking him in the shoulder. He cried out in pain, collapsing to the floor. At that moment, flashing blue and red lights illuminated the windows. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder. Eleanor's heart surged with relief. She had called the police the moment the lights went out, knowing in her gut that something was wrong. 2 officers burst into the room, weapons drawn. "Hands where we can see them," one barked. Benjamin glared at Eleanor as he slowly raised his hands. "You'll regret this," he snarled. Victor dropped to his knees, tears streaming down his face. "It was all him," he sobbed. "I didn't want to do this, I swear." Arthur, still in shock, watched as the officers handcuffed his sons. Eleanor stood by his side, the adrenaline slowly draining from her body. As the police led Benjamin and Victor away, Eleanor knelt beside her father. "Are you okay?" she asked softly. Arthur nodded, his voice trembling. "Thanks to you." Eleanor took his hand, her own shaking. It's over now. They can't hurt you anymore. But as the rain continued to fall outside, Eleanor couldn't shake the feeling that the scars left by her brother's betrayal would linger long after their departure. In the days that followed, the Whitaker name was dragged through the mud as news of the attempted murder spread. Benjamin faced charges of attempted murder, and Victor, though not directly involved in the attack, was charged as an accomplice. Eleanor stayed by her father's side, helping him navigate the chaos and rebuild their fractured family's reputation. Though the wounds ran deep, she vowed to uphold the Whitaker legacy, this time on her own terms. And as Benjamin's chilling words echoed in her mind, "You'll regret this," she steeled herself for whatever might come next. The courtroom was silent, the air heavy with tension. Benjamin and Victor sat in the defendant's box, their faces starkly different. Benjamin's defiant scowl radiated anger, while Victor looked hollowed out, consumed by guilt. Arthur Whitaker, ever the pillar of strength despite his years, sat in the front row with Eleanor by his side, her presence a steadying force. Before the court hearing officially began, Arthur had requested a final meeting with his sons. Surprisingly, both Benjamin and Victor had agreed, though for very different reasons. Benjamin wanted one last chance to manipulate his father. Victor, perhaps, sought redemption. The family meeting. In a private room within the courthouse, Arthur sat at a simple table. Benjamin and Victor were escorted in by guards, their wrists bound by cuffs. Eleanor stayed outside, at her father's request, though she lingered near the door, just in case. Arthur looked at his sons for a long moment, his face etched with sorrow rather than anger. "Sit," he said simply. They obeyed, though Benjamin slouched in his chair, his lips curled in disdain. "What's this, father? One last lecture before they lock us up?" Arthur ignored the jab, his voice calm but heavy with emotion. "I didn't raise you to be like this. I didn't raise you to betray your family, to stoop to murder." He shook his head, his disappointment palpable. "Where did I go so wrong?" Victor's head hung low, his hands trembling. "It wasn't you, father," he murmured. "It was me. I let Benjamin talk me into it. I was weak." Benjamin scoffed. "Weak? Don't pin this all on me, Vic. You didn't put up much of a fight when I suggested it. Don't pretend you're innocent now." "Enough," Arthur said, his voice firm. "Blaming each other won't change what you've done." He leaned forward, his eyes boring into Benjamin. "You've always been angry, Benjamin, always looking for someone to blame for your own failures. I tried to help you, but you pushed me away." Benjamin sneered. "Help me? Is that what you call constantly comparing me to Eleanor? To Victor? Telling me I wasn't good enough? You didn't help me. You tore me down." Arthur's expression softened, pain flickering in his eyes. "I was hard on you because I believed in you. I thought if I pushed you, you'd rise to the challenge. But maybe I was wrong." He turned to Victor. "And you, Victor. I bailed you out time and time again, hoping you'd find your footing. But instead of facing your problems, you let them consume you." Victor's voice cracked. "I'm sorry, father. I was so scared of losing everything that He choked on his words, tears spilling down his face. "I don't know how I became this person." Arthur sat back, his shoulders heavy with the weight of the moment. "I loved you both. I still do. But love doesn't mean shielding you from the consequences of your actions. You crossed a line that can never be uncrossed. And now, you'll have to face the repercussions." Benjamin leaned forward, his voice dripping with bitterness. "So what? You're here to tell us we're still your sons, despite everything? That you forgive us?" Arthur's gaze was unflinching. "Forgiveness isn't mine to give. You need to earn it, if not from me, then from yourselves." Benjamin leaned back, his smirk faltering for the first time. Victor simply wept, his shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Arthur stood, his voice steady but filled with finality. "This is the last time we'll speak like this. What happens next is out of my hands. I hope you'll use the time you've been given to reflect on what you've done and who you want to be when it's over." With that, he turned and left the room, Eleanor meeting him just outside. She slipped her arm around his, and together, they walked back to the courtroom. The verdict. The trial was swift, the evidence overwhelming. The prosecution presented the security footage of Benjamin sneaking into the house, the syringe found in the bedroom, and Victor's tearful confession during the investigation. Eleanor testified as a key witness, recounting how she stopped the attack. When the judge delivered the verdict, the courtroom held its collective breath. Benjamin Whitaker, you are found guilty of attempted murder, conspiracy to commit murder, and reckless endangerment. You are hereby sentenced to 25 years in prison without the possibility of parole. Benjamin's face twisted into a mask of fury, but he said nothing. The weight of the sentence seemed to settle over him like a shroud. Victor Whitaker, the judge continued, you are found guilty of conspiracy to commit murder and aiding and abetting. Considering your cooperation with the investigation and your expressions of remorse, your sentence is reduced to 10 years in prison. Victor broke down, his sobs echoing in the courtroom. Benjamin glared at him, muttering something under his breath, but Victor didn't respond. Arthur watched from his seat, his expression unreadable. When the sentencing was complete, he rose and walked out, Eleanor close behind. Aftermath. In the weeks following the trial, the Whitaker estate began to heal, though scars from the betrayal remained. Arthur, though deeply hurt, found solace in Eleanor's unwavering support. Together, they began restructuring the family's legacy, focusing on charitable initiatives and ensuring the Whitaker name would stand for something more than wealth. Eleanor often wondered if her brothers would ever truly change. She wrote to Victor occasionally, offering him words of encouragement, but Benjamin remained silent, his anger festering in the confines of his cell. One day, as Arthur and Eleanor walked the grounds of the estate, Arthur paused to look out over the rolling hills. Do you think they'll ever find their way back? He asked quietly. Eleanor placed a hand on his shoulder. I don't know, Father, but they'll have to want it for themselves. Arthur nodded, a flicker of hope in his eyes. We can't change the past, he said, but maybe, just maybe, they'll learn from it. And with that, they turned back toward the house, ready to face whatever the future might bring.